Hi, my name is Juliana and I'm making this video for other people who have a MARPE and who have braces and who might be struggling with trying to protect their tongue or trying to protect their cheek from different brackets. I have some notes in front of me to make sure that I hit all the points that I want to, and mainly I'm just hoping that this information and demonstration maybe makes your life a little easier. There's a product that has a very unfortunate name called Gishy Goo. It comes in a tube like this one I'm almost done with. It has two different components that you press out and then mix together, and it makes a sort of putty that hardens over time. It never hardens to a point where it's actually hard, it just hardens to a point where it's spongy. I've tried, like many of us, so many different kinds of wax, so many different kinds of barriers, and for the gap that is formed from my MARPE, this has been a total lifesaver. Also for the TADs, the temporary anchoring devices, or the screws, I now have some composite material on there that makes it so that my tongue is fine, but in the interim, like before I have the composite put on or in between the composite sort of wearing through the first time and having it reapplied the second time, these really saved me, especially since I just had issues with certain ones sticking out in ways that my tongue had a really hard time with. The other thing that this has been really helpful with is that I have a bracket on my lower wisdom tooth, and no amount or type of wax that I could find actually made a difference for that. It would fall off all of the time, even if I wasn't eating, and it was just such a pain, and this stuff stays on all day if you know how to apply it. The way that I use this is that in the morning, I brush my teeth and do whatever cleaning if I need to do the water pick or whatever, and then I apply this to both parts of my MARPE gap, and then I also apply it to my lower wisdom tooth bracket, and then it stays in all day, which is amazing. In the evening, I take it out and I clean, and then I put it back in the MARPE, and I do use wax for overnight. But this, I mean, it stays in all day, it stays in all night. It's so amazing. It really has made it so that my quality of life is a lot better. The other thing is that I didn't expect is that my MARPE is a lot easier to clean up above when I have this stuff in, because it makes it so that food, I guess, doesn't get up there as easily. So whenever I have this stuff in compared to when I don't have it in, there's a lot less food that gets stuck up there, which is always a nice thing. So yeah, I'm gonna talk a little bit more about my setup, what tools I use, and some tips and tricks, and then I'm gonna do some demonstrations. So this is how my setup normally looks. It's a little crazy. I'm just going to point out the things that I use specifically for putting the putty in my mouth. One thing I really recommend, is getting one of these kinds of mirrors that has the light around the outside. That's been very helpful. I have a Q-tip that I use to dry off the gap in the MARPE. It's reusable for a few times and then it gets a little too deteriorated to use. I got my tube of the Gishy Goo. And a couple of the things that I also recommend having is one of these hooks that has a very pointed end and then a flat end. This is sort of, you can see it got dropped at one point and broke. It's a little junky, but the hooks that I have that are the more official ones, they tend to tear too easily through the material, or they jab you in the cheek. So I usually use this hook here to take out the MARPE gap material, and if I have any on the TADs, but I use this softer, less pointed edge to take it off of a bracket so that I don't accidentally stab my cheek. A timer is very useful, especially when you're first starting. This has been very helpful. This is an air compressor that I got that's rechargeable. It's usually for your keyboard or whatever, but I have found this to be extremely useful. I will say, as soon as it goes from the 3 power down to the 2 battery power, oops, I lied, sorry, these are actually the power settings. I definitely use the 3 power when I'm doing the blowing part. When the battery goes down from 3 to 2, I notice quite a bit of a power drop off, so I usually try to keep this thing charged. Because it's so bulky, I keep it in this little cup, which is too tall without these little things in the bottom, so I put some marbly things in the bottom so that the charge port comes right up above the lip, and then I can just plug it in and charge it. Another thing that is important to have is some sort of flat edge. So I use the edge, the butt of my tweezers. This is not important for the MARPE. This is important for your brackets. If you use it on your brackets to sort of flatten it down to help with shaping it, some type of flat edge. Okay, a couple of other things that I recommend having. One is this mirror, the little dental mirror. This is definitely helpful for the MARPE, especially when you're first getting used to using it. The other thing is some sort of flat, clean surface. I just use the top of my, the Vaseline tub. You could use like the top of one of your wax things, although I have found that when the Gishy Goo's on there and I try to pick it up, then sometimes the whole container will come with me, so having something heavier is more helpful. This again is for if you're putting it on a bracket. I don't use this if I'm only doing my MARPE, but if I'm using a bracket, then I need some kind of flat surface. You could also even use like the edge of the mirror. Mine isn't ever clean enough. And I recommend wiping it off every time before you go to use it, because inevitably there's some like either cat hair or some dust or something that ends up in the Gishy Goo, and then it can, sometimes it's bothersome, but sometimes it just makes it not as sticky. Yeah, so again, the things that you definitely need for the MARPE, or that I would recommend, would be this mirror with the light around it, one of these little baby mirrors, and this Q-tip. And then if you're also doing brackets or the TADs, then I recommend using an air compressor that's rechargeable, having some sort of flat edge, and having some sort of clean, surface. Wow, that was exciting. Having some sort of clean, flat surface that you can use. And to remove them, I recommend having a hook. The sharp hook is fine for the MARPE gaps, but if you're removing from a bracket, having something that is a little bit duller is nice, because then you don't run the risk of stabbing your cheek. Okay, so some things to know about Gishy Goo, and again, I've got my notes in front of me, so I make sure to hit all the things that I've been thinking about. So I buy 6 tubes, I think it's 6 tubes at a time, and I get them on Amazon. That's the easiest place that I've been able to find them. It's like $60 to $70 for 6 tubes, so it turns out usually to be a little more than $10 a tube, which is not cheap. The amount that I use it, one of these lasts me over a week for sure, maybe between 7 to 10 days. Depends on how much material you need, what you're using it for. In terms of if it goes bad, I mean, I've had some of these tubes for months and months, and they're still just as good as the first one when I open a new one. And as long as you keep them capped, I haven't had any issues with them going bad. Yeah, so I would say plan on wasting some in the name of experimentation. So I really recommend to use a little bit or however much to mess around with it and to get to feel how the properties change as it sets up. That was something that I wish I had known to do, because then what ended up happening was, as I was getting used to how it sets up and how it changes, I was also trying to get it in my mouth, and it would have made a lot more sense, and I actually would have saved more of the putty if I had done some experimentation in the beginning. So I recommend, I think at this point I just throw the instructions out, so I don't remember exactly what they say. I'm pretty sure it says that you mix it for about 10 seconds. You like push out how much you need, you mix it for about 10 seconds, and then you have about 30 seconds or so to get it in the spot that you need it. Okay, the flavor, so it's advertised as having bubblegum flavor. I'm usually pretty sensitive to flavorings, and I would say that it is pretty negligible. I do taste a little bit of a bubblegum flavor when I first put it in, but I hardly notice it and it goes away. I don't know, maybe by the time it's done setting up, it's gone. So I was a little bit tentative about the bubblegum flavor, but if you're also tentative about it, and even if you're sensitive to stuff like that, it hasn't bothered me at all. So I hope that it would be the same for other people too. The properties of this guy changes a lot with a few different factors. So one is the temperature. I have found the ambient temperature to make quite a big difference. Right now I'm in the winter time of the great state of Oregon, and the setup time is longer than in the summertime. We went camping last summer. Unfortunately, during a heat wave, it was like 100 degrees every day, and it set up almost immediately. Like I had almost no time to get stuff into my mouth. So the temperature, even though it says mix for about 10 seconds and it takes about 30 seconds to set up, it varies a lot with the temperature, the ambient temperature. The open time of the tube also matters. So like this one is new, so I know that probably, or I guess the other way, like so probably until here, it's actually going to require a longer setup time. And this is really important because when you go to apply it to the area, you need the right amount of malleability and the right amount of stiffness. So when I've tried to apply it when it's not quite set up enough, then it ends up just either it just is smushed too much on my finger, or when I try to like, I use my tongue to push it up against the MARPE, and when I do that, it just smushes everywhere. So if I'm ever impatient, it doesn't go well. So you got to try to time it right, where it's set up a little bit, you can shape it, you can get it in the little cylinder, but that it's still malleable, you can get it into the space that you need. Another thing is to find the right amount. So sometimes I was trying to be economical, and then I would use less than what I thought I should need, and then I ended up having to redo it, sometimes even multiple times, because it will smush too much and not actually cover the harsh edges that you're trying to cover. So you want to try to have it bulky but not too bulky. If you make it too bulky, what I found is that it comes out easier, so it might get caught on something if your edges aren't smooth, or if it's just sticking out a lot. The other thing is that I will get like speech issues, so sometimes it'll be harder for me to enunciate certain sounds that require the roof of my mouth. If I block it off too much, then that can be a problem. Another thing is that if I've made it too bulky, then it'll go around the MARPE and actually go and touch the roof of my mouth, which it doesn't cause irritation issues, but it for me, the sensory input is very annoying. So I have to make sure that I do enough so that it covers the edges, but not too much that it actually goes and touches the roof of my mouth. I don't want it to cause speech problems, and I don't want it to be so bulky that it could more easily come off. Okay, another big thing, this stuff sticks to dry. It sticks to dry very, very, very well. With wax, you can kind of cheat a little bit with that. Like if, like I, can put wax in certain areas without actually drying off the area first. This stuff, you will not get good results unless the area is dry, but it also means that if you put it to a place and then you touch it with your finger or with a tool or an implement or something that isn't, like you don't, like whenever I touch it with something, I always lick the thing first. Otherwise it pops right out. It comes right out onto the dry thing. So if I'm going to touch it with for my bracket, if I go to touch it with my finger, I touch my tongue on my way to touching it. Or I use the tweezers to do a little bit of shaping for this back bracket. And I make sure to touch the tweezers to my tongue before going back there, because otherwise it'll pull the whole thing off. For the actual MARPE application, I don't use the compressor for that. I do just use a Q-tip, and that has actually been fine. When I was doing it on the tabs, I definitely needed the air compressor for that. I tried doing it with the Q-tip and it was not working. So the tabs, if you need to put the putty on the tabs, then the air compressor is really important for that. And I found the air compressor, it needs to be about 10 to 15 seconds on the highest power setting, and that is enough to dry it. As long as if you're doing somewhere for your cheek, you got to hold it open while you get the putty in there. Yeah, so it sticks to dry regardless of what the dry stuff is. Oh, the other thing that I've also noticed is that so my hands run dry. For other people whose hands run dry, you might have an issue with this. What I found to be the most effective is that part of my routine is I wash my face and I put lotion on my face. I use like an oil-free, like it's a very non-greasy lotion that absorbs quickly. And so I found that if I clean my teeth, wash my face, put the face lotion on, wait a couple minutes while I do other things, and then my hands have some moisturizer on them, that has worked really well. I haven't had issues with the putty sticking to my fingers with that. I'll still need to do the licking thing of like touching my tongue if I'm going to touch the putty, but I don't need to do more than that. Otherwise, sometimes I do need to do more than that if my hands are pretty dry. Another thing about these guys is that as you push the plunger up, you can't pull the plunger back out. So there's no reverse. You can't go backsies. It just, the mechanism pops out of the little holes that it fits into. What that means is that each time you put the cap in, it actually displaces a little bit of the material. So what I have found is that I wait until I've done all of my puttying, until I know, okay, I'm good with how it's going to be, and then I cap it. What I've run into in the past is that sometimes I will cap it before I'm certain. So the way I do it is I do one MARPE gap, the other MARPE gap, and then my molar. And if when I do the one for my molar, it sits out for a little while. And what I was finding is that I would cap it, and then I'd sometimes have to redo the molar or redo something else, and then I'd have to open it again, and it wastes a little bit every time. And because these tubes are kind of expensive, the thing that I have found to be the most reasonable is that I just wait to cap it. And I haven't had any issues with it drying out or anything like that. Okay, that wraps it up for my tips and tricks and ideas we're sharing. I'm going to go through some demos next. I'm going to demo the 2 MARPE gaps and my wisdom tooth. One of the things that I have found to be helpful is I'm right-handed, and I used to do my right MARPE gap and then my left one before doing my wisdom tooth, but I've actually found it's a lot easier to do the opposite side of your dominant hand and then your dominant hand side, only because otherwise you're sort of reaching across, and I found that I'm more often either dislodged or just misshaped the one that I had already put in. But when I do my opposite side and then my same side, it goes smoothly every time. So I recommend doing that depending on what your dominant side is. And I also wanted to mention that in the demos, I was able to film several demos for each part of it. And so sometimes on the screen, I'll be showing multiple demos at the same time. And one of them actually looks like I messed up the putty, and then I was able to recover it, which is cool because sometimes you're able to do that and then you don't waste it, which is nice. Yeah, so without more talking, let's get on to the demos. My setup is a little bit funky because I'm going to be trying to film from multiple different angles at the same time. So my tools and stuff are in different places than they usually are. I'm going to try to attempt to show my use of the tools, how I'm managing the putty, as well as what's going on specifically in my mouth. So here we go. Okay, so you start out with the Q-tip and you dry off the spot of the MARPE gap that you're going to apply the putty. You can see I keep my mouth open this whole process here because I don't want to undo the work I just did. Sometimes if you're in the middle of the tube, it can be a little hard to start the push of the putty. So you want to be careful with that because you don't want to squirt it all out all over the place. But sometimes you end up having to use quite a bit of force. Yeah, so then you mix it up in your fingers, and if your fingers are too dry, then it's already going to cause problems. But you roll it into a ball, then roll it into a cylinder, and you can kind of see I'm really trying to balance it on the tip of my finger. And now I'm trying to position it so that I can use my tongue to sort of press it very gently. Press is kind of a strong word even. I'm really gently touching it. I found that when I pushed harder, what happens is it pushes into the crevice and then doesn't cover the harsh edges that I'm trying to use the putty to cover. So you got to be very careful with how hard you press with your tongue. It takes quite a bit of practice. I also, you can see, or maybe you noticed, I put the mirror in my underarm. I sometimes do that, or put it in my crotch if it's fogging up very quickly. Then that's the quickest way I've found to heat it up, as long as you're clean. And again, I make a cylinder and get it right on the tip of my finger, and then I try to position it over the MARPE gap so that I can just press my tongue very gently. And if the putty is too wet, this part won't work. It'll be too stuck to your finger and it'll start deforming. So that's where the balance of having it set up enough so that it's still malleable, but it has a little bit of stiffness. So now you can see I'm keeping my mouth open. I'm sweeping off my
flat surface here, and I'm only going to push out a little bit from my bracket here. I'm keeping my mouth open. I'm letting the putty set up at the top of my mouth. You can close your mouth, just don't put your tongue up above, or don't press your tongue up against your roof of your mouth, or you might end up accidentally undoing the work you just did. And I got my tweezers ready. So now I'm gonna swallow right here before I do the air compressor. And I do the highest level of the air compressor for about 10 to 15 seconds, right on that bracket. And I very, not discreetly, but only a little bit do I move the air compressor around. I'm really focusing on that bracket. And then I'm gonna lick my finger before picking up the putty, otherwise there's no hope there. And then I'm trying to place it onto the bracket, and I again lick the flat edge that I'm using the tweezers so that it doesn't stick to it, but you can see I didn't do as good of a job. So I am able to salvage it. Right here I do relax my cheek into the putty. I found that is actually the easiest way to shape it there. I use my finger, which I also lick, to kind of push down the top of it. And then I'm puffing out my cheek, and I keep my cheek puffed out for about 30 seconds because that gives it enough time to set up. And while those 30 seconds are going by, now I feel confident I can cap the goo and I can sort of put stuff back. Um, and that's sort of the lay of the land here. I have a couple more examples after this one as well. The removal of the putty is very straightforward. You use the pointed tip to stab into the MARPE gap putty. You can pull it right out, as you can see. And then you switch over to the rounded tip for any brackets that you need to take off the putty from. It's a little tricky in the back. I struggle, I have a couple examples here, and I really struggle with one of them because it was kind of hard to see with my camera and mirror setup. But even with that, it comes off pretty easily. Sometimes you gotta shred it or do some other effort, but overall it's pretty straightforward, and then you just throw them away and you're good to go. Alright, so this is another take of applying the putty to the MARPE and that bracket. Again, same process, use the Q-tip to dry that area, and you're gonna figure out how much putty makes sense for your gap, and it can change if you're still turning. Uh, Again, I use the mirror to try to see if I'm positioning the putty correctly. I'm trying to place it right under that crack. Unfortunately, my camera angles on this one weren't as good, but it does show the tongue action really well. So I decided to share this example. Again, the tongue, it's so easy to do it too hard, and then you just sort of smush it everywhere and you got to start over. It really doesn't take much. It's gonna feel like you're doing nothing, but you're doing plenty. And again, reminding you to do that I recommend doing the opposite of your dominant hand and then doing your dominant hand side. So I did my left side first and now I'm doing my right side. And again, you can see how just about how long it takes for the putty to set up at this point. When it's earlier in the tube, it definitely takes longer. Yeah, so again, trying to position it underneath that crevice. There I wipe the mirror off on my shirt to try to get it so I can see a little better. I am going a little bit slow here. It's just hard to see with the setup. So you can expect your process to eventually get much faster than this. And here do have my mouth closed, but I'm not pushing my tongue up against the roof of my mouth. I found that if I do that, then it makes it so that the ridges of the MARPE come through the putty and it defeats the purpose. I really try to keep my tongue away from the roof of my mouth. The bracket putty I do make into an actual ball before I um, go to do the blowing part with the air compressor. And again, I'm really concentrating it on that one bracket. I'm accidentally fogging up the the close-up camera there. and this part is about 10 to 15 seconds. I count to 10, and then I sometimes add another 5 depending on it. And I also hold my cheek open. You gotta hold your cheek open. That's a whole other skill that you'll get eventually. And also remembering to put some moisture on your finger before you go pick up the Gishy Goo there. And here I do a better job of folding it around the bracket, and then I release my cheek to let it finish the shaping. It really is the most efficient way, and you can see that it just kind of folds it around there. I again use my finger to push down the top because it sort of muffin tops up above a little bit, and I just wanted to press that down to make it so that it stays put. And it does. And then I hold my cheek out for about 30 seconds. Alright, this is my last example here. The same process, hopefully it's starting to get familiar. Again, my first take, or the first one that I showed, had the best camera angles, but this one is still worth showing because there's a couple things that it does a good job of illustrating. And I'm wanting to remind you again of your hands need to be moisturized enough for this. You can see that the little sausage is just at the tip of my finger. The other thing that I realized I should mention is that it's really important to leave the cylinder fatter than you expect it to. Expect it to be. You don't actually want it to match the thickness of the gap. You want it to be bigger than that because you're going to sort of press it gently, gently press it into place. When I made it the cylinder in a way that, oh, it's going to fit right into the gap. That's exactly what it does. It fits right into the gap and it doesn't actually cover the ridges. So you really do want it to be thick enough so that it covers the ridges and then kind of gets smushed up in there enough to hold its place. So again, right on the tip of my finger, that has been a really important strategy. And then you can kind of see, I know again, it's such a bummer, but you can see I'm also kind of, I'm moving my tongue from forward to back to also kind of make the edges, the ends of the putty go up into the crevices better. And then they don't come out during the day. And then again, the little putty ball for the bracket in the back, and I make it a little ball and then I put it on my surface. And then I am keeping my mouth open. I'll get a swallow right here because of the buildup of saliva and dry off that bracket. And this part, I took the sound out, but it's very, very, very noisy. So just, be aware of that if you have housemates or if you have sensitive hearing. Again, it's about 10 to 15 seconds here. Holding your mouth open, wet your finger, get the Gishy Goo, try to place it on that bracket if you can. And this, again, is a little slow because it's just hard for me to see. And then again, I wet the tweezers on my tongue before I go and I touch that Gishy Goo because otherwise the tweezers take it right off just because it's dry. Relax your cheek and let that help shape it. Use your finger to push down the edges if it's, muffining up over the edge there, and then hold your cheek out for 30 seconds or so while it finishes setting. I found that if I just relax my cheek after that, then again, it defeats the purpose because it just sort of pushes at the edges until they come through. All right. And then you finish putting your stuff away and you're good to go. You got your MARPE covered and your bracket.
I hope this information and demonstration helps you manage your mouth better, and I hope that it helps you have a better quality of life as you go through your orthodontic journey. Thanks for watching.